welcome to the Ei Café with Azim, where I give late look back at the lives and business of today's most important elements with emotional intelligence. You will learn how emotional intelligence can be a key factor for your success in both personal and professional life. From leadership, collaboration, organization culture, positive mindset to raising kids. You will hear key life lessons and tips from most prominent personalities, business leaders, entrepreneurs, emotional intelligence practitioners, and executive coaches from all over the world. So, sit back, relax with a cup of coffee, and let's get into the show. This is Ei Café with Azim. Today's business environment may be the first to include 5 different generations working side by side toward the shared economic and commercial goals. For business owners and executives, managing multiple generations in the workplace may be as easy as it sounds. Again, maybe not be as easy as sound because each defined generation can have different expectation, communication style, and perspective. A very warm welcome to the show. I'm your host, Azim Sahir, a human capital specialist, a Lego Series play facilitator, ICF certified coach, and a Genos emotional intelligence practitioner. Here we are again for another episode, a 30 minutes of valuable learning. In today's episode, we are going to talk about managing next generation workforce. So when you talk about why this particular subject is important, that's why this podcast is about. So to discuss this, I have a fantastic individual all the way from Ireland. Let me introduce him. He's an executive coach, an author who has written 4 fantastic books, and his real passion is about speaking, right? He was a speaker at the recent TED Talk organized by the TEDx Cookstown on the topic of invisible worry. He is a specialist in this particular concept. And his expertise in helping clients and partners implement AI-based solutions that deliver measurable return on investment. He's the creator of NAIL, N-A-I-L model for managing worry. So when you talk about worry, managing different generation is a worry for today's leaders and managers. So ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Deirc Mccan, Head of International Development at Genos International. Deirc, welcome to the cafe.
Wow, that was a great welcome. Thank you very much indeed. I think that's the best round of applause I've ever had in my career.
Especially virtual, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The very best. Thank you. You've done my a lot of good.
All right. Deirc, first and foremost, thank you very much for spending your valuable time with me in the cafe for this particular discussion. As I mentioned, why I choose this topic, especially in terms of your element, especially that worry element. I did listen to that part, TEDx talk. It was fantastic. So it made my life easy to build this topic around, because one of the worry these days most of the leaders and the managers have is managing this diversified next generation. That means generation Y, Z. As I mentioned in the introduction, we have 5 different generations working side by side in this particular term. So in that context, Deirc, my first question is, what is the generational gap in the workplace? Broadly speaking, the difference in behavior, the outlook between group of people who are born at distinctly different times. What is your take?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, if you just put it in perspective and you think of it, you look at the color of my hair and you can tell that I have a couple of years over you. And I've been around for a couple of years longer. And for the first time ever, you have people like me who are old enough to have grandchildren. I have grandchildren, who are old enough to have grandchildren working alongside them in the workplace, with their children working alongside them in the workplace, with other granddads working alongside them in the workplace. And that has never, ever happened before. So people talk about the 5 generations, the traditionalists, the baby boomers, the generation X, Y, and Z. But when you put it in perspective, you're talking about granddad, dad and mom, and the grandchildren all working in the same workplace. And that's a first ever, but it's not a last ever, because as life expectancy rises and rises and rises, that's going to be the way of the future. And that's a real challenge. It's a real challenge for people of my vintage. And it's a real challenge for young folk, because we expected, when we turned 20, as we moved into the workplace, we expected from everything we read and everything we knew about the world, that the older generations would have the good grace to die off, or at the worst case, to retire off and leave the world to us to run. And now suddenly they're still there sitting in the nest. And that's a kind of a challenging situation. So there's no way that somebody like me, born in 59, shares the same worldview as my daughter, born in 1989. So they are real challenges. We are utterly different people. We live in the same physical world, but in utterly different cultural and intellectual worlds. So it's a major problem.
Absolutely. I think, and I feel it is a great privilege to understand the different perspective. I don't know whether, Deiric, you have watched this movie, Intern.
Yes, I did. Yes,
Right?
I did.
I always take that as an example. There is always opportunity to learn from each and everyone, right? That young chaps learning from the elderly age intern, in terms of business, in terms of family, the emotion, right? I still remember this guy's trying to show his emotion to that the one of his crush, and she start crying, but this young chap didn't have a handkerchief. So suddenly he give the handkerchief. So that itself shows how much sort of generational difference and the attributes has been in the workplace, right? So in that context, Deiric, we all have deep human needs, right? In this aspect, as a leader, how can we look out for different needs, because the generations are different, their perspective, the expectations are different. As a leader, how can we look out for this?
Well, I think one of the first things that we need to do, if we're leading a workplace which is diverse in terms of age groups, and if you're not leading one of them now and you're a leader, trust me, you will be in the next couple of years. It's just inevitable. It's just going to happen. And the first thing I think that's really important it's very much a mindset shift that has to be made to be able to manage those sort of workforces. And it happens long before you get to the stage of what do you do day to day. It's very much a mindset shift, as I say. If you think back, to traditionally, how do we think of older people? And traditionally, our approach was that we considered that people who are, a generation or a generation or two older than us, at least in the English language, we'd have called them elders. And elder it's kind of a term of respect. In your mind, you think of the chief in, let's say, the Native American chief. And he was considered to be the holder, because he had lived an entire life, maybe up to be as old as I am, up to be 60. Which in his day was probably really old. And so he was considered to be the holder of all the wisdom, and was given great respect, and had a tremendous input to the way the tribe worked. And it's the same in the tribe here in Ireland. We don't wear the headdress, but traditionally the approach is that the elders have a lot to teach us. Now, what has subtly changed over the last maybe 20 years or thereabouts, as we get into this multi-generational workforce, is the language that is used for talking about people that are older than us has changed. And it's changed from elder, and elder kind of held a sort of respect element in it. Many people in many cultures talk about the elders in the tribe, the elders in the community, etc. And it had a sort of respect. It was about the wisdom that they have built to date. And now, slipping at least into the English language, is a description of elderly. And it comes from the same root, but it has a very different meaning. It's actually can be quite a negative meaning. It kind of means, elder has this sense of being wise. having accumulated useful knowledge, whereas elderly just suggests you lived a long time. Okay. And you know, it wasn't always necessary through history that everybody who was elderly was an elder in that sense, had something, some wisdom to contribute. But neither is it in this current time the case that those elderly don't have something to contribute. The key thing, and the reason, and the way that you see how this has affected our culture, you only have to look, if you go onto the web and look at the growth in men's hair dye over the last 30 years, and it has gone like a rocket because men increasingly, particularly men, increasingly feel the need to make themselves look younger. When my dad, never mind my dad, when I was growing up, I would have lied about being older because I wanted to have that sense of gravitas. I wanted to have the impression, give the impression that I was wiser than I was. So I'd lie about being older. Now what happens is you got people like me and they're lying about being younger. And I don't even necessarily mean telling lies. I mean, they're dyeing their hair. They're dyeing their hair. They're changing their habits. They're hanging out in the wrong places and so on and so forth. And that's because there's this pressure on them that makes them feel that in order to be able to contribute, they have to be young. So going back to your question, the first thing that a leader has to do to lead that workplace is recognize that there is a place for everybody there and that older folk in that workplace have something to contribute, which is as unique in its way as what the younger folk have to contribute. You know, so that's the first attitudinal thing. And then you have to look at, you know, then in a broader brush, what is it that each of these have to contribute? Let me give you a real broad brush sort of approach to it. If you think of it right now, you could say that, I mean, the research shows very, very clearly your emotional intelligence rises and rises as you get old. Now, it gets to a certain point and it starts to decline, but then it gets to a certain point and everything starts to decline. But your emotional intelligence tends to grow. So you grow what we traditionally call wisdom. And wisdom is just, it really is just having screwed up so many times that you know how to screw up. And if you know how to screw up, you can know how to avoid it. So there's that sort of wisdom, that experience, that having screwed up experience. That's something that the older hands in a job can contribute. You look at the other end of the spectrum and you look at the folks right now. I have a 3.5-year-old grandson, right? And he will come in and he'll grab my phone and he'll unlock it. And he'll go on to YouTube Kids and he'll be watching Bluey or Number Blocks or whatever. And he's swiping away ads and he's working with that. We have this EQ. The older generations tend to accumulate wisdom and experience over time. And that's a tremendously useful thing. But what the younger generation have is DQ. They have this digital quotient. They have this ability. They're almost like, if you're a Star Trek fan of old, they're almost like the Borg in the sense that they are almost integrated with their technology. My grandson will grow up never remembering a time when there wasn't an electronic extension on the end of his arm. And so that means that for the first time in history, the first time ever in history, wisdom or knowledge, let's say, is flowing in two directions. Traditionally, what happens is, as people get older, they accumulate wisdom. And so knowledge and experience and wisdom flows downhill to the more junior folk. And so the younger generation learns from the younger generation. But now you've got this younger generation down here, and they have much higher DQ, a much greater ability to be in this modern world, and a much greater understanding of that. And you see that potential for that to flow uphill. So you can have the EQ flowing downhill from that older generation to the younger generation, and the DQ, that sense of this modern world kind of flowing uphill to that older generation. And the cleverness of the people who get this right is to be able to recognize, how do I put different generations into a team that I don't put them into a conflict situation, but I put them into places where each can learn from the other. so that you can pair people off so that you get the best of both worlds from both of those audiences. So, there's lots of little, what's the word I'm looking for? There are lots of little sort of hacks, if you like, that people can do. But I think the fundamental thing that leaders have to do is recognize that there is a place for, there's an Irish song, and it says, all God's children, which are animals, have a place in the choir. Some sing high, and some sing low, and some sing higher. It's exactly the same in the workplace. All of God's children in that workplace have a place in that choir and a place to play. The clever leader recognizes, where are the strengths of these different generations, and how do I bring them together? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think it does really make sense. And that's the way to go forward, I feel, because that EQ and DQ need to be there, because otherwise the corporate entity will lose the race in this race of profitability, right? So,
yeah.
Deiric, in line with that, so can these generation embrace the emotions at workplace? What do you think?
Can we improve? Sorry, run that past me again.
Can these generation embrace the emotional element in the workplace? For example, let's say stress, let's say anxiety, because with the digital content coming to, as the DQ coming into picture, there's a lot of struggle, a lot of competition around the business, right? So a lot of stress and the depression parts evolving more than ever these days, right? And if you see, the younger generation are getting more into the medicine, the prescriptions, right? Because the reason being the stress, the high anxiety, getting into depression. So how a leader can, or the organization, help them to embrace emotional element in the workplace?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, one of the things, there was a great there's a great piece of work that was done by an Australian gentleman called David Rock, and he did about 20 years. He did a meta-analysis of about 20 years research to look at what are the factors that trigger our brains into positive or negative states. So what is it that puts it in a really productive place? What is it that puts it in a really unproductive state? And he came up with 5 factors, and that you have to respect if you want to keep people in a productive place. And it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Now, status is obvious, and it actually goes to the previous item we were talking about. We have to respect what people have to contribute and not demean them in any way. And that's very obvious, because when we're disrespected, we feel very, very negative. But here's the second one, certainty. That's really important. Our world has zero certainty, because the only certainty you have is that any certainty you have right now will not be there in 5 minutes' time, because the world is changing so fast, because information moves so fast, because diseases and pandemics move across the world at a rate. So you've got this emotional brain that is 400 million years old and moving at the pace of a human that's 400 million years old, working in a world that's changing at a pace that's just would have been utterly unimaginable to those folks. And the brain is not built to deal with that. It's built to deal with stability and certainty. So the one thing that you're absolutely certain of moving forward is that people are going to become less and less certain, because we've a fantastically fast changing world. It's not because change is not negative, but we're not built for it. So the one thing we're certain of is people are going to be more and more and more stressed. Stress is simply an emotional reaction to something we feel unable to control. And until we get to, as individuals, until we know how to notice our emotions as they're arising, observe what's driving them, observe the way we react to them, and choose a more useful way of reacting to them. Until we can do that, we suffer. And we suffer very, very dramatically. So in answer to the question, how does somebody in a workplace bring emotions in a productive way into the workplace? You start to educate people on emotional intelligence. And there's just no way around that until people know that everything they think, every behavior that they display, every decision that they make, everything that comes out of their mouth, every thought that goes through their head, absolutely everything in their lives is affected by emotion. Until they understand that, and until they're able to get a perspective that, okay, this sense of this pressure, this stress, this tension, whatever it is just the reaction of an ancient brain to a very, very modern world, and get to a stage where we can choose a more effective reaction. Until then, we suffer. So most people are not going to do that for themselves at home. So if we're bringing people into our organizations and we're expecting them to be productive, we have to give them the tools to be productive. And one of those tools is the ability to manage their emotions. And it's not so that we're nice guys. It's so that we get people who can actually cope well enough with the world to be able to do what we need them to do doing their jobs.
Absolutely. I think that's what is a key element. One of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast to bring that message around why this EI is so important. It is not only that workplace we are talking about. As a human being, what are we looking at? So, Deiric, in that line, my next question is, with your experience, like, what would your view on the expectation of the next generation workforce? How do they
Mm.
want it to be managed, right?
Yeah,
What do you think?
yeah. Do you know, I'm not a researcher in this area, and I couldn't describe myself as an expert, but I always have a real problem with this idea of putting generations into a box and saying this generation has these attributes and this generation has these attributes, because I honestly think that we pass through all of those different sets of, I would believe that I had many of the attributes that the millennials and the Ys and the Zs have when I was younger, and that I passed up, and so I'm passing into a set of attitudes and ways of being that resemble sort of traditionalists as I get older. So I'm not sure it's ascribable in the way that the popular press and the researchers like to ascribe it to a particular generation born in specific years. I think they're kind of sets of attitudes and behaviors that we all pass through over time. Now, do they change over time? Of course they do, because the world changes. But one of the things that has always been there, and it's what we always want to be there, is the young generations coming in think they know it all. And by the way, if you're a young generation, listen to this, don't turn off and don't get all insulted. I mean that as the best compliment I could give you, because the best thing that a younger generation coming into the workplace brings is the sense of openness and innovation, that because they don't have the experience of having tried and failed at things, they have this sense that I can do anything and I know best, and let's do it this way. And because of that attitude, innovations happen mostly from younger folk. Now, so I think what you have to do is you have to figure out for the younger generations coming in, how do I allow them to have as much latitude as possible to innovate, to genuinely affect things, let them have as much responsibility as it's responsible to share with them, so that they can start to change the way we do things. And I think because there's been so much talk about particularly the millennials and how they, and it's been very disparaging, talking about how they think they're wonderful, they think they know everything, and there's been an awful lot of really, really negative talk around that. But the reality is that because there's been so much talk about that what's the word I'm looking for? Stereotype. Well, then we start to resemble the stereotype, and so the people we're dealing with, they expect to get promotion faster. They're not prepared to stay around for half a generation doing mundane tasks, and you don't want them to. You want to get them in and use those fresh, fast, innovative, technology-enabled brains to the best of their ability, because that's what they want and that's what we want of them. So I think we just have to learn to accept that the younger generations coming up are going to be more demanding and less respectful of the old traditions of you gotta spend 10 years or 15 years earning the right to have an opinion, and give those folks an opinion and empower them and enable them and watch them change our world.
So, Deiric, then what about the organization aspect, right? Because I know what you said was a very highly complex workforce, all right? They're very demanding, they're tech savvy, they're innovating, but they don't stay in one place for some time. They just keep on moving. In terms of organization, those who
Yeah.
are listening might be the leaders of organization, business leaders. How can they tackle this segment?
Yeah. You know what? And you're absolutely right. I mean, I was amused the other day when I was looking back over my career, and I was able to say, with a few exceptions, I basically have had 5 main positions in my career. I'm 61, and I've had 5 main positions, not a couple of small positions, but in general, most of my life has been spent big chunks in organization in a single organization for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, in one case 18 years, and that's just not happening anymore. There was a study in the United Kingdom recently where they said that the average person, young person taking a new job, intended to stay in that job for about 19 weeks. 19 weeks, yeah? which is incredible. Now, average hides the fact that many will stay longer, many will stay a shorter period as well. But 19 weeks versus, let's say, old guys like me who stayed 19 years or 18 years in a single position. It means that we have to figure out new ways of working. The key thing is that we definitely cannot manage this new workplace with the old approach. Okay, so we can no longer say, take that sort of top-down command and control approach to things. We have to start taking more of a networked approach to the way we work with people. Personally, I think the sensible thing to do is that you network people in teams. And I think, if you've got a multi or an age diverse workforce and you got multiple generations in there, I would be actively constructing teams that consist of multiple generations, so that, for example, you've got that wisdom or EQ mentoring coming from whatever is the older generation in the workforce, paired up with the sort of entry level who have that energy and that excitement and that EQ. And in the middle, that solid bunch, because it's always in the middle, we become much more stable when and again, I don't know what the numbers are, but let's put it up around 30 to 40 or thereabouts. We become more stable because we tend to be procreating, creating a family, nesting, etc. So if you can create teams that are based around that have the benefit of the wisdom coming from the old timers like me, I'm allowed to say that, have the energy and the buzz of the young folk, and then you have the people in whatever is the sandwich generation who are stable, less likely to want to move on. They're trying to raise their family. They're looking for stability. Then you're likely to be able to work with those generations and not find yourself falling apart when either the old folk disappear or the young folk disappear, because both is going to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Deiric. So, Deiric, we have come to the end of our conversation. So the last question, what would be 2 things you'd like to share to our listeners who is listening now, who's in the leadership position, who's managing different generation? What are the 2 key things you'd like to share with them, what they can practice daily basis to manage this, take this worry out of their mind and focus on building the performance? What do you think?
Yeah, you know what, and this is not directly responsive to your question, but it kind of is as well, in the sense that I think the single biggest thing that anybody leading any team of any size and any organization of any size that we have to be mindful of and pay attention to is, regardless of the age of the workforce, is our own well-being and the well-being of the people that are working for us. Because I tell you right now, and I'm seeing it, we've put several thousand people through resilience and stress management programs to help them deal with this whole thing since it really raised its head 9 months ago. And what I'm seeing really, really strongly is I had a call from a client yesterday. It's now what, the 15th or the 12th, 15th of December. And they said, we need to have an emergency meeting. And I go, oh God, what did I do wrong? And we had the emergency, and they said, we are getting messaging back that is telling us that our mid-level managers are really, really very fragile right now, that there are a lot of people who are really right on the edge, ready to collapse. We need to do something for them. And now most of this same organization has been doing some really great work for the troops, for the general employees. And they needed to do that, absolutely. But they weren't taking account of the fact that those managers, particularly ones who give a damn and really care, they're really under severe pressure right now. And so right through the organization, every one of us is feeling pressured that we wouldn't have felt in previous years. So it doesn't matter whether it's young entry level people or it's people on the exit level, let's call it that. You need to be mindful of the fact those Facebook faces that you're seeing on them are absolutely artificial. We are all under pressure, and you need to be proactive, get out ahead of it, and start to equip people to deal with those challenges. So that's whether you've got an age diverse workforce or not. It is the single most important thing we're moving into 2021, because let me make a prediction. We are, as a race, as a species, we're incredibly resilient. And when we're under pressure, as we have been for the last 12 months, and we're full of adrenaline, we're full of cortisol, and all of the resources of our body are dealing with a challenge, we actually tend to be kind of okay, under pressure, but okay. But when that challenge goes away and we can take a breath, and with the arrival of some of the vaccines and some hope that we're going to come out of this pandemic thing, people will start to say, okay, we're passing through this. And the moment they do that and they let go, the adrenaline and the cortisol is going to be there, and it's going to be like the strings that were holding them up have been snipped. And there is going to be an incredible wave of mental challenges, mental well-being problems, stress, anxiety, panic, etc., as a result of the aftermath, as a result of having come through the pandemic thing. And I think that's the single most important thing that we can address ourselves to as leaders and business owners.
Wow, awesome. That's truly amazing. And that I think really, we need to work on that particular element. Yes, as you said, vaccine is here, or the challenge is they just take a breath, it's over. But then again, aftermath is what we exactly need to work around, which is going to be a long term, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So ladies and gentlemen, that's the time that we have for today. There are a lot of insight and inputs were shared by Deiric on this particular subject. So one of the key elements I would say is the respect, what we look out for, because each generation is seeking a lot of respect in terms of their personality, their behavior. So if you're a manager, a leader, look out for that respect. That is the key element everybody is looking at. And I hope there were a lot of inputs for you guys in this line. So my special thanks goes to Deiric McCann, Head of International Development of Genos International. You can get connected to Deiric through his social media. He's actively on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And please do check his TEDx speech on YouTube as well. Fantastic element, especially this particular segment of becoming a worried leader. So please have a look at it, and it's a fantastic tool, the nail. So it's really amazing. So Deiric, on behalf of the cafe, thank you very much for spending your valuable time in the cafe and sharing your insight and thoughts as well.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
Managing different generations has become one of the key skills in the corporate arena. Creating an inclusive workplace, creating an environment to exchange wisdom and digital intelligence, and more importantly, embracing emotional context in the workplace will help leaders to manage multi-generational workforce. That's the end of another exciting episode. I trust that this conversation was very useful in terms of managing different generation in your workplace. Special thanks to Deiric McCann, Head of International Development at Genos International, for spending his valuable time in the cafe. Stay tuned in for the next episode where I'm going to bring up another interesting topic with an interesting individual. Ei Café with Azim, a 30 minutes of valuable learning. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep improving. So that's it for another episode of Ei Café with Azim. Thank you so much for tuning in, and it's really appreciated. Please subscribe to the show so you get an update on my next episode. Write a review to the show and leave a 5-star to the show. Please do follow me on social media, Azim Sahil. And do write to me what topic and from whom do you want to hear it from, where I will try to get them on board for you. Till I meet you on another exciting episode, checking out of the cafe, my name is Azim Sahil. Stay safe and God bless you.